Thank you. Again, welcome everyone to the Getting Things Done in Your Woods series. My name is Bill Klase. I'm a natural resources educator at UW-Madison Extension. And this afternoon, I'm going to be talking about things to do to keep your woods and trees healthy. And this topic kind of arose from all the other classes we've been holding where often people want to do something to keep their trees healthy, but they're not exactly sure what to do. And we give them ideas and other things that we talk about, like keep an eye out for invasives, get rid of them, and look for insects and diseases, but not specific things that you might be able to do on their own. And there's some really good things that you can do to keep your trees healthy and your woods healthy and productive and meeting your goals. And so I'll be talking about that today. Um, our agenda for this class will be, well, first we'll go over and talk about what a healthy woodland looks like. And then we'll get into how you can monitor, keep an eye out for healthy things going on in your woodlands, and how you can keep an eye on it and steps you can take. And then we'll go into three common scenarios that I've encountered while working with landowners, problems they have, and they seem to be very common problems, and what you can do about those to get a healthier woods that's more productive and still meet your goals. And we'll talk about these three scenarios: too many trees, not enough new or young growth, and lack of diversity. And at the end, we'll talk specifically about when to seek help, but I'll also be touching on instances when it's a good idea to talk to a professional to help get either another opinion or some advice on how to proceed with an issue that you come across. So that's what we'll cover. I'm trying not to cough, like I said, but we'll see how it goes. All right, so let's go. So let's start with what makes a healthy woodland. And really, it's about how resistant your trees and woods are to threats that come against them. And what often that people don't realize is that your trees, your woods are constantly under threat. There's all kinds of stuff that want to kill them in the way of insects and diseases and fungi and wildlife. They want to eat them and survive in them. But the elements also can affect your trees because they can't really go anywhere. They rely on everything coming to them. So if there's a drought, that's going to put stressors on the trees and may kill them. If there's too much water, flooding, that can put stressors on trees and kill them. You can have a whole herd of deer come into your woods and munch everything down to the ground, and that's obviously going to be a problem into the future. And so, your woods and trees will survive best if they're resilient, if they're vigorously growing, and they have a good diversity of habitats and trees and shrub species, especially for wildlife. But that diversity plays a big part in them being healthy well into the future, well beyond your lifetime. So the components of that, what a healthy woods are, it's many plant species, diversity. Without non-native species, without those invasives that we have problems with. And I'll talk more about those in a few minutes. But diversity is the key. You want a lot of species so that one insect or a disease can't come in and kill everything off because you don't only have two or three tree species within your forest. So getting more diversity is always better. And the work you can do towards it, either through the harvesting you do or the tree planting you do, will encourage that dramatically. And your trees have room to grow, and a lot of room to grow. I'm going to talk about this in the scenario, but the trees are constantly fighting with each other, their neighbors, for sunlight, for soil moisture and soil nutrients to grow. And that competition takes place all the time within your forest. And so if they have good spacing within your trees and they have a lot of room to capture their full sunlight, they're going to go a long way to be healthy and vigorously growing trees and be able to fend off attacks from insects and diseases that may come their way. And then complexity is also a big part of your forest. You don't want to just have all big trees or all little trees. You want to have that diversity of plants, ground plants, and annuals and perennials and shrubs and young trees and old trees. All of that provides habitat for the things that might be eating or attacking your trees, like this forest tent caterpillar that's pictured here. It's a native insect here in Wisconsin and in the Midwest, actually. And it's always around, but it's occasionally, like every 10 to 15 years, there's a population explosion, and we get this big pulse for like 2 to 5 years of all kinds of forest tent caterpillars, and they munch away at our broadleaf trees like this one's doing here, and then for another 10, 15 years, they're gone. But in that time, they can really do a lot of damage to your trees. Most trees, if they're healthy and vigorously growing, can survive it. But if you can work to increase the things that are going to eat it, that'll help slow it down and help to protect your tree. So if you have good complexity in your forest that attracts the birds that eat these particular caterpillars, then they're gonna come in and just live off of this buffet of bugs and help to protect your trees into the future. Okay, so now that you know what healthy forest looks like, let's talk about ensuring that it stays healthy. And the first step of that is to keep an eye out for things that can threaten your forest. And the best scenario is if you can get out there all the time. Like if you live on your property, you walk your woods every day, you can and walk throughout your woodland, your property from end to end, from property lines. That's the best way to keep an eye out for anything that might happen to your forest. That's, like I said, the best case scenario. Often, though, we don't live on our forest or live away from our forest and can't be out there every day, every minute of the day walking around, which is awful. And I wish I could do that more frequently. But uh, my suggestion is if you can get out there at least 3 times a year and keep an eye out for health issues, that's a pretty good start. And I'll give you some guidelines for these 3 times a year to do it. And you're looking for like obvious signs of damage. And coming in the winter, that we can get heavy snow loads on our trees or ice late winter's ice storms that come through and put a heavy load on the branches and the branches break. And there you have a wound on your tree that is a point of infection for things like fungal spawn or other diseases that are out kind of floating around in the air. They land on that wound and infect the tree. Or insects can get attracted to those wounds and infect your tree. So keeping an eye out for obvious signs of damage is a good thing. You're looking for obvious signs of poor health. Things like mushrooms growing out of your trees is not necessarily a good thing, but we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Looking for new insects and disease infestations, new invasive plants. If you already have invasive plants on your property, and you're working to control those, but you want to keep an eye out for new infestations so that you can attack those while they're still small and easily manageable. And I put down threats from your neighbor properties. That can always be an issue. Our neighbors, we live in a day and age where you might never know who your neighbors are, and you may never meet them. They may never be at their woodland when you're there. So if you can get a hold of them and contact them, that's fantastic. Get to know them and really talk about where your property boundaries are, so you both agree on those. But often that's not the case, and they might be there when you're not, and doing things on your property when they shouldn't be. And so it's a good idea to keep an eye on your property lines and see what your neighbor's doing and what's going on in your neighbor's property, because something that might be a threat that may be developing on their property could spread onto yours. So you want to keep an eye on what your neighbor's property is going through and what's happening there. Again, you want to catch these new problems early before they become big issues. Okay, the first of the 3 times a year that you want to check your property is late winter, early spring. And the idea behind this is that you can check for the snow and ice damage that I talked about to the branches and tops of trees. There's also wind damage where they break off, the tops of trees get broken off. Those trees in the future, you can identify those that have damage. Excuse me. And when you think about, well, when I talk about removing some trees to make room for others to grow, those with the damage might be the ones that you remove so that, because that damage might be irreversible and it might cause a tree to die prematurely. And so knowing that there's some damaged trees might be a good one to say, hey, that one I know I'm going to harvest. It'll be good firewood and I'm going to make room for other trees to grow. So you were noting that damage to your trees from the winter and keeping an eye out for invasive plants. And this is especially for the ones we worry about the worst here in Wisconsin, are very common throughout the state, are the invasive buckthorn and invasive honeysuckle shrubs. Often they will put out new growth earlier than our native plants do, our native shrubs do. And the picture that I'm showing here is an example of that. The trees haven't leafed out yet, but the buckthorn underneath is all leafed out. And so has an advantage for the plant in that they get an early they get a few days or a couple of weeks of extra growth in that growing season before the natives can come out so they can get bigger faster. The downside for them is that we can identify them quickly in early spring or late winter. We can find them pretty quickly and then we can attack them either by pulling or cutting them in the early spring and winter or digging them up. I wouldn't encourage you if you are going to deal with the invasive shrubs in early spring or late winter. I would encourage you to do some kind of mechanical control on them. Invasives aren't nearly as effective as this time of year as they are in the summer and in the fall. And then again, walk your property lines and fence lines. Make sure there's no damage from trees falling on your fences. Make sure you can still find. This is a good time before everything starts leafing out and you can't find your monuments for your corners or your property line flagging. So this is a good time to go and walk those lines. See if there's any damage. See if your neighbor was decided over winter that they wanted to ride their snowmobiles on your property, or they created a new ATV trail onto your property. Check for that kind of stuff and keep an eye out for invasive plants that might be coming in your neighbor's property that might be threatening yours in the future. All right, that's the first one. Then in the summer, it's a good time also to be out there checking the health of your trees and woodland. Now that everything's leafed out, you can start to see if there's obvious signs of poor health in the needles and leaves of your mature trees. That is always going to be some kind of um, diseases and insects that are, like I said, they're always around, they're native ones. And so you always see something like that. But if you see a lot of discolored leaves, a lot of trees that are not vigorously growing, they're only producing, some of the branches are producing leaves. They look the crown is kind of thin. It doesn't look like it's vigorously growing. Or there's obvious insect infestations like the forest tent caterpillar that I showed you a picture of before, or this spongy moth caterpillar that we have a picture here of. You're starting to see a lot of those. That's something to take note of. Is it a small population? Is it a big population? And especially if you're not seeing much in the way of seedling growth in your forest, you have mature trees on your property, then they're producing seeds and you should get some seedling growth. If you're not seeing much on the forest floor, that could be a bad sign of, well, maybe your trees aren't healthy enough to produce seeds, or you have a really high deer population, they're munching everything down to the ground. When it comes to the big insect infestations, or you're seeing some discolored needles and leaves and you're not sure what it is, this is a good time to call your local DNR forester. If you don't know who they are, you can go to the DNR website, dnr.wisconsin.gov or wi.gov, and go into their search bar and type in Forestry Assistance Locator, or just type in, I just do FAL, and you'll find the Forestry Assistant Locator link. And when you enter the county your land is located in on that page, you'll get contact information for your local DNR forester. They want to know about if you're having a forest health issue that might become big and widespread or might be new to the area. They want to know about that. So don't be afraid to give them a call if you're not sure what you're seeing, or not sure if it's a big deal or not. Often they have cell phones, and a service plan, so don't be afraid to send them a text or send a picture of what you're seeing to them and to get some advice, or maybe even have them come out to take a look at what you have and offer some suggestions on how to proceed. Okay, the third time of year is in the fall, and who doesn't want to be out in the woods in the fall? It's my favorite time of the year to be out in the woods. I like it because there's no bugs and it's great temperatures, and it's a good time to be out there working. So in this time of year, you're looking for invasive plants. They will stay green longer than our native plants, native shrubs. And this is a picture of buckthorn. Again, this is in the fall. They produce these beautiful big fruit that wildlife like to eat, but it makes them poop, and so they spread the seeds really quickly. And it's a bad thing, and but it's an easy way to find the buckthorn on your property. And so it's also a great way to find it, and then use an herbicide on it at that point, because it's not the native plants are already dormant, so you can use the herbicide and not worry about it affecting your native plants as much. But there's if you have bigger shrubs, there's some good techniques to use at this time of year. The cut stump treatment or basal bark treatment. I'm not going to talk a lot about those in particular, because in other classes in this series, we have talked about how to do those techniques in detail. And at the end of when I send out the link to this class, I'm going to send a link to that playlist in our YouTube channel so you can see all of the Getting Things Done uh, class recordings and find specific information that I talk about here, along with other classes that might be of interest to you to watch. So, I mentioned herbicide use, and if you're interested in doing some foliar herbicide or spraying leaves with it, the summer is a good time to do that. Obviously, you want to be careful not to spray onto your native plants or the ones you want to keep. But this is the fall is a good time to do the treatment on the woody plants that are on your property that you don't want. And the cut stud treatment, the basal bark treatment are really good ones. Fall is also another good time to be out there and doing some kind of active management on your property, active timber harvesting, active manipulation of your stand to get it to where you want it to be. And it might be something as simple as, well, like I said, I need some wood for my fireplace or my wood stove, or I want to create a firing lane from my stand to hunt deer from, or I want to put a new trail in or something like that. You're probably out there with a chainsaw doing work like that anyways. Now, this is a good time to be doing that because it's less likely that your trees, when you cut them and the stumps, will be infected by fungal spores and diseases that are floating around the air. Because as we get to the fall and winter, those are so much less common, and so you can safely be out there harvesting trees without worrying about spreading the insects or diseases to your the remaining trees. All right, so those are the 3 times to be out in the woods. How am I doing on time? Good. Okay. And as I said, if you can be out more frequently than that, fantastic. Keep an eye out, and if you have big property, do it in sections. Try to get to each one at least some part of your property at least once a year, but at least three times is the next step up, and then more frequently is even better. Okay, let's talk about common woodland problems. And as I said, I chose 3 scenarios because those are the ones I see most often when I talk with landowners and visit their property. And these are things that they've said that asked about, what can I do? How do I deal with this? How do I deal with this? How do I make um, my woods more healthier and make my trees more vigorously growing? All right, so these are the 3 I chose. Often, like I said, I go into stands, there's too many trees, it's too crowded. What do you do? People ask me, or they have a stand that's all big trees and there's no little trees. Or they have a stand that's all the same species and not much diversity at all. And what do they do? And I'll give you some pointers for each of those. Too many trees, the very common situation. Often it's a number of very common things that lead to the situation. One of them is that it might be a young stand. And as a new forests grow from just bare ground, there's often a very high density of seedlings that come in, and that seedlings becoming saplings or bigger trees. And the way they'll naturally thin. Some of those will outcompete the others, and the ones that are poor in this competition will eventually die off, and you'll get more space being created by these trees dying off. And that'll naturally happen in most stands, but it's a very slow process depending on your species, and it can take a long time. And in that time, while they're kind of self-thinning themselves, the trees are often very stressed because there's a lot of competition for sunlight and soil moisture and soil nutrients. And so it can be a really good idea to get in there and facilitate that thinning process, speed it up, and get to where your trees are growing vigorously all the time, rather than these long periods of stagnation where they're just struggling to grow and fighting vigorously over sunlight and soil moisture and soil nutrients. So that can happen in a mixed species stand, like the drawing on the left, or it can happen in a plantation where you've planted a bunch of red pine or white pine or spruce into an open field. And then the trees are just kind of at the stage where they're 6 to 10 inches in size, and they're all kind of packed together, and they'll thin themselves over time, but it can take a long time. But you can facilitate, like I said, go in there and remove some of those trees to make room for the other ones to grow. And so for the hardwood situation or the mixed species situation, the thing to keep in mind or think about is you go into the stand and think, well, it's too dense. What do I do? Which ones do I take? Which ones do I harvest? Which ones do I leave? Always in the back of your mind is, what's my objective? What trees do I want? What mixture do I want to meet the goals that I have? And then choose the trees that help to do that, and then remove the other ones. That's a really good starting point. Like, okay, I'm not sure what to do. Which one should, oh, well, I want to have more oak. I want to have more hickory. I want to have more red maple or sugar maple. Then favor those trees and remove the other ones. And I did a class last year in this series about choosing the right trees to harvest, where I talk in detail about this process. And so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on that, on the steps that you take of deciding which trees to remove. Like I said, I'm going to send you a link to that playlist, and you can watch that video and get to of that the recording of that class and get in detail that process. But there is a process to follow, and so you that's how you first walk into the stand. But I think another way to think about this process is to, instead of looking at the sides of the trees, look up into the canopy and try to think of, like, the picture on the left is a stand there's too many trees. It's too dense. There's too crowded. There's no room for these trees that are here for the branches to expand and the trees that get bigger that way. They're all kind of butting up against each other. So the simple step you take is to make room for those to grow. You make gaps in the canopy by removing trees to make room for your favorite trees to grow. And room on two sides of the tree is enough. If you can make room on three sides, that's really good. But you don't want the trees to be completely unsupported, because they spent their whole lives growing up with other trees next to them and supporting them. And so you need to keep at least one tree next to the trees you want to favor, so that they can kind of lean on each other when it gets really windy. So you're creating room around your favorite trees to grow. That's the way to look at this. You walk up to your trees. Okay, walk up to tree. This is a good one. It's a good sized trees. It's a dominant tree. It looks pretty healthy. It's got all the characteristics I'm looking for. So I'm going to remove the trees around. I'm going to look up and I can see the trees that are interfering with its growth, and I'm going to remove those. And it can be just that simple. And that's an easy way to make a big difference on those trees. And all of a sudden, they have all this extra sunlight on them. They're going to start to grow like crazy, and they're going to be so much more vigorously growing that they can fend off attacks from other or from insects and diseases that might be attacking them all the time they are. And they can outcompete other things around them for the sunlight and soil moisture and soil nutrients. So that's an easy thing to do. When it comes to a plantation, it's also pretty easy to do things, especially if you've planted these trees, or these trees are planted in straight rows. Then it can become even easier to take steps to make these trees to grow. And often when we talk to landowners, either the DNR or us in Extension talk to landowners about, how should I put trees in the ground? I want this plantation to become big red pine forest in the future. With mixed species later on, we say, well, it's easy to plant them in rows, and then you come in 15 to 20 years later and you remove one every third row, and then you wait another 15 to 20 years, and then you start removing trees within the rows, and then you wait another 15 to 20 years, and you do the same thing again until you have a picture on the right where you have a good space between trees, and you're starting to see other species come in from underneath. And these two pictures are actually from an experimental forest in northern Wisconsin near Star Lake, where they planted trees, and they split the plantation in half, and one half they did a thinning to them, like I described, and the other half they didn't do anything. And the picture on the left is where they did nothing. And this is actually this stand is over 100 years old, and they've been regularly harvesting or thinning this stand to create room for the remaining trees to grow. And that's potentially a regular source of income from this stand, where every 20, 15, 20 years, you can sell, if it's a big enough property, you can sell those trees. If it's smaller and no one wants to buy those small trees, you can cut them up yourself and use them for your own uses, whether it's helping to support your trails or for firewood or something like that. But you do want to do a thing. What you notice in the two pictures as well is that in that stand that's never been thinned, it's slowly thinning itself, but it's taking a very long time, and there's almost nothing growing underneath it. Whereas the one on the right, you're getting a lot of good secondary growth coming in, especially where there's more light coming in, where they thinned it a little bit heavier. You're getting excellent growth in there. And that's what you're looking for. You want eventually the stand to be taken over by something else in the future, so you have a more dynamic system rather than just this one stand of red pine, and more stuff is coming in underneath. So that's what you do if you've got too dense a stand, too many trees. And I mentioned, I talked just briefly, or I mentioned having the dominant trees and thinking about the dominant trees in your stand. Which are the biggest trees are getting the most sunlight on their crowns, and you have smaller kind of co-dominant trees in your stand, and there's those that are a little bit below those that are slowly coming up in the stand, and you have suppressed trees. I share this with you just so that you can think about when you're looking at the trees and deciding which ones to harvest. You might have some really big dominant trees, but it might not be the ones that fit in with your objectives. Or they might be trees that are the faster growing ones. They're dominant now, but they won't live very long, much longer. And the trees that are your future that you want are those intermediate trees. And so what should you do to favor those? And maybe you do decide to harvest the dominant trees and to make room for the intermediate trees to really take over. And that's okay. It might not be. It depends on your situation. And if you're really not sure, if you're still not sure when you're thinking about this, and if you review the other video that I have, it's perfectly all right to give your DNR forester a call and say, hey, I'm not sure how to proceed. I'd like some advice. They're happy to come out and do a visit and give you some advice. If you have a lot of trees that you're harvesting and you're thinking, well, there might be some value in here, then it might be a good idea to contact a private consulting forester and bring them in. And often they might not charge you anything for an initial visit, an initial consultation, or that you. It's a good idea though if you end up conducting a commercial timber sale on your property to have a forester that's under your employ to help you with that, so that you get the maximum value out of that, along with the monetary value, and you get the most out of it that helps you achieve your goals. Some people feel comfortable working directly with a logger. That's perfectly all right. I would encourage you to work with a forester first, to be they work for you, they're your agent, and you'll most likely get more from the harvest than if you didn't work with one. And our research shows that you end up actually getting more money when you work with a forester rather than just working directly with a logger. Okay, the next scenario is when you have a stand that has a lot of mature trees and there's good spacing, but nothing is coming in underneath. And there's some small seedlings, but they stay small and they don't get very big at all. Or like that's a good, the picture on the left is a good one of that describes that situation. The picture on the right is of a balsam fir. And you might have a whole stand with only a few balsam fir coming in here and there. And that's because the deer don't like balsam fir. That's the last thing they'll eat when they're starving. They might eat the balsam fir, but they'll eat everything else first. And I've gone to many properties and I've seen this situation, and it's a tough one because people love deer, but when they're in your property, they will eat everything down to the ground, and they can be a big problem. I visited some of the tribal property forests here in Wisconsin, and I've seen tremendous growth taking place there in the understory, new seedlings coming in and growing, become mature trees, all kinds of different structure within the stand. And I've talked to the manager of those forests, and they always say that we don't have that problem because all the deer are in our freezer. We hunt them so heavily that we don't have deer pressure problems, and that's great for them. It's hard to do on our own property, and so I think there's things you can do to alleviate this situation and get some more structure and diversity within your stand. And there's some simple steps you can take. And when I talked about the thinning of just creating room around individual trees, that's not quite enough in this situation. You need to create some sizable gaps within your forest to get more sunlight down to the forest floor and instigate and invigorate the growth of the small seedlings and shrubs within the stand, to change the structure so that you have some small stuff along with some big trees and mature trees. And the gaps aren't extraordinarily huge that I'm talking about. They could be obviously less than an acre, most likely, probably like a third to a half an acre. You put a few of these in at a time on your property, and it can go a long way to creating that growth that you're looking for and then that structure that you're looking for. Unfortunately, there's a couple of caveats to this. And the first one is if you've already got invasive plants on your property, you don't want to open up a gap where you've got invasive plants, because they will really take off if they get full sunlight. And so you want to put them in areas where your invasives are controlled, and you have a species mix that you think will really do well. You already got trees around there that will provide some seeds into the site that will help to seed it so that you get the trees you're looking for. The other scenario is that you'll get some good growth when you create a gap, that's going to attract deer and they're going to come in and munch, and they might really put a lot of pressure on that gap and the shrubs and the seedlings that are coming in there, that it can really stunt its growth for a long time before it'll finally fill in. And to that, I say, I think you should build some exclosures within the gaps. It doesn't have to be anything big. This is an example. I think the pictures I've been showing you are from this property where this particular landowner, he happens to be in a tree farm program, and I visited his property this past year. He put in these exclosures. It's just like a 20 by 30 fence. It's not that big within the gap, and he got tremendous growth within those within 5 years. And then within like 5 to 10 years, you can remove the fencing. The trees get and shrubs get big enough. You can remove that exclosure and move it to another spot where you create a gap and get some more growth in there. And you just keep doing this process to a different part of your property. You create a gap, you cut some trees down, create this gap, put in an exclosure, and let the stuff come in like crazy within that fenced in area. It's amazing how fast it works, how much, and look at the ground around this fenced in area. There's like nothing growing around it, but within there's tremendous kinds of seedlings come in and shrubs come in and ground layer plants coming in. It's amazing how easy it is, and it's not that expensive. And in fact, I'm going to talk about the USDA Natural Resource Conservation Service. Their field agents called district conservationists, and they have technicians as well that can help you get some funding to do this kind of work, and they can offer some technical assistance to help you figure out what the best way to do it. So if you think it's too expensive, there's opportunities to get funding to help do this. But it's actually pretty easy, and it's a great kind of fun thing to go out and watch happen over time, how it evolves and improves and grows over time, and seeing this structure kind of develop within your forest. Okay, the last scenario is a lack of diversity. And this can happen a couple of ways. It very commonly, a plantation you put in can convert some old farmland by planting trees within it, and you get basically all one species in there, or maybe two species. Or you have a mature forest or a climax forest. We have those here in Wisconsin. That's basically just one species because the other ones that aren't as well adapted to coming into a mature forest, and so you end up getting mostly just one species. This is driven by deer. I can't say it enough how powerful the deer have an impact on our forests, and how much you have to work against that energy the deer put into it. But this is because we don't do enough to ensure the vigorous growth of our trees. And I say this as lack of active management, but some people see it a different way. They think that, well, Mother Nature has been managing these forests for millennia, and why should I do anything different? Which is perfectly all right. You can do that if you want to. It does have a consequence. Everything you do to the forest has a consequence. If you do nothing, you're gonna go on this path where things might change or evolve without you having an influence on it, and it might not be achieving your goals. But the more active you are in manipulating the forest and trying to create the conditions that you want, the more happy you'll be with your forest. So, lack of diversity. Let's start with a plantation. And red pine is often planted in Wisconsin because it grows well here, and it's a valuable species. And the picture on the left is a plantation that a very common kind of look to a plantation. It's probably time for, you can see there's nothing coming in underneath. It's all red pine. And this one's probably has been due for a thinning for a while now. The first thinning that usually takes place in a red pine plantation, if you've planted them in rows at a certain density that would be recommended by forester, is to take out every third row or every other row, depending on how you planted it. That can be enough room for those remaining trees, enough space for them to continue to grow like crazy. And then in 15 to 20 years, you go in there and you maybe take out a row, or you go in and remove trees individually. The picture on the right is a more mature forest. And you can see where all of the diversity is. It's where there's a gap in that forest, in that plantation. You can see there's plantation in the foreground of the picture, and in the background of the picture there's plantation. But in the middle, there's a gap. There's there's no canopy. There's all kinds of reproduction taking place in there. That's where all the diversity is. That should be a hint as to what you need to do. You need to create those conditions that are different than where the plantation is. And it's pretty simple. You create a gap. You create an opening in the stand, and if it's big enough, you'll get the kind of diversity you're looking for. Now, here in Wisconsin, we have two common forest types. There's northern hardwoods forest type, and there's central hardwoods forest type. And they're made up of species like the maples, red and sugar maple, and oaks in the south and in the north as well. Things like hickory in the south. You might get basswood in the north. The ashes used to be a big part of those two forest types, but unfortunately, they're kind of going away because of emerald ash borer. So what happens is that within those, the maples are the best adapted to a mature forest or climax forest. They're the climax forest species here in Wisconsin when it comes to hardwoods. Beech is another one, but it's only in the eastern part of the state. They grow really well in the deep shade underneath mature trees. Other ones, ash can do pretty good too. Oak doesn't do as well. Hickory does pretty good, but none of other ones in the state of the broadleaf trees can do as well as sugar maple. And what happens is they produce a lot of seedlings. And once those seedlings start to take over, you can get a stand that's mostly some kind of maple, red or sugar maple. It might be 80, 70, 80, 90% sugar maple. There's not much diversity in that. And if you happen to get an insect infestation that loves to eat sugar maple, it can go through your forest pretty quickly. So that's the kind of lack of diversity. It looks like this, like in this picture. This is a hardwood, this is a northern hardwood stand that's mostly maple. It looks, wow, there's a lot of diversity in there. There's different tree sizes. There's a structure that bald guy talked about, the structure I was looking for, but there's not much in the way of species diversity. And that's a problem because you want the sugar maple and red maple might be great at attracting this small number of wildlife that you're looking for. But if you want others, you need these other species in there as well. So what do? Same thing. You create larger gaps on your property, not the small ones we talked about at the last stage. You need something bigger. It's got to be more than an acre in size. It could be 5 acres. It could be 2 or 3 acres, depending on whether you want it to be how much land you have. If you have a lot of acres, then you can do 5 to 10 acre size small gap creations or large gap creations. I'm sorry. Clear felling, they're called clear cutting. I know it's a nasty word, but that's a common word. It's you're creating an opportunity for different species to grow and flourish on your property. This full light, these big gaps with full sunlight hitting the ground, they favor those fast-growing species that you wouldn't find in a mature forest. Things like aspen, things like birch, things like the jack pines and the red pines and the white pines that come in naturally. You'll get such a different mix of species and the shrubs that grow in full sunlight, such a different mix of species than you would have in your mature forest. This is one that you probably want to have do as a commercial timber sale, or at least get a forester in to help you design it. You might want to first get some advice from your local DNR forester about where to do it, how to shape it, where the boundaries should be. And then think about doing that on a regular basis, creating these larger gaps on your property around and create this patchwork of young forests and older forests and some in between that are in different stages of getting to become bigger forests. So that diversity of this patchwork of diversity will go a long way to providing the diversity of species that you're looking for and the diversity of wildlife habitat and wildlife that you're looking for. It seems like it's a dramatic change to your stand, but it'll make a big difference in that within your whole property with the diversity that you will have. And you can be proactive about what starts to grow within those gaps, within those large gaps, by doing some planting yourself. You might think about planting maybe some white pine seedlings or some white spruce seedlings in there, or maybe you want to get a different hardwood mix and rather than open it up for deer or the randomness that deer might be and hope that something comes in, you could plant things like oak, like in this property, this landowner put in some tree tubes and put some oak seedlings in them. And these trees on the left are within, I think, 5 to 10 years old. They're almost ready for the tubes to come off. And then just they're above the tree line. You can see how tall those tubes are. They're like 5 feet tall. You can get them there even taller. No, I think 5 feet. Yeah, I think 5 feet is the tallest. But they're really well made now. You pay a little bit more for the tubes. They'll last until these trees are mature, and then you can use them again. And the trees actually do really well. And in fact, when I visited this property and this landowner gave a demonstration of how to install the tubes. And if you go to the Wisconsin Tree Farm website, you can see the video of him installing one of these tree tubes onto his property. And it's amazing how well the trees grow within those. And you can go a long way to getting the kind of mix of species that you want by using simple tools like these tree tubes. And don't go cheap with those, get the expensive ones. And they might be like $10 each, but it's well worth it. Like I said, if you can use them for a couple of rounds of planting. Okay. So we're talking about when to seek help. And I think I've mentioned a couple times when it might be valuable, especially if you're doing a commercial timber sale where you're selling trees to a logger's buying your trees and selling them to a mill. That's especially a good time to get some help. Get some advice from your local DNR forester, hire yourself a private consulting forester. But there's other times too when you're not sure what to do. What's when you need advice and the limits of your knowledge have exposed themselves. And so here's some specific circumstances I think it's a good idea to get some help. And I don't just do it once. My advice is don't be afraid to give them a call on a regular basis. Send them notes. The forester, your district conservationist, give them if you got questions, you're not sure how to proceed. They're there to. That's what you're paying them for. Your tax dollars pay for these folks to be around. If you got questions like for a DNR forest is a good one to consult on forest health issues, especially insects and diseases. They want to know about those. But if you're not sure about which trees will do best on your soil type or in your property, where your property is, they're good ones to talk about that. They've got a lot of experience with tree planting, and they can offer advice on when to do it, what species, on what tools to use, how to prepare the site for tree planting. And if you got invasive plants, they have like experience with those as well, and they can offer advice on herbicides to use, techniques to use, and how to go about doing all of that. So don't be afraid to call them for those kind of things specifically. If you've got soil erosion problems, the district conservationists are great folks to contact for that. They can, especially if you have problems with your trails, if you got stream crossings that you want to, so that you're not going into stream all the time, they're good ones to contact for that. If you need some funding for your problems or you're trying to address some issues or get something done, especially putting up fencing is one thing that we've talked about many times. The NRCS has some great funding opportunities that you can take advantage of. The DNR has some as well. So you can talk to DNR Forester about those. They're great folks to the district conservationists also they mostly work with farmers, agricultural producers. So if you've got some open land that you want some advice on, they can help you with that. And which species to plant, they're good with that too. And if you got now the chainsaw training is a tough one. I know just about everybody that owns land owns a chainsaw, and most people I talk to have never had any training. And my fear is that people buy a chainsaw and they feel like they're an expert, but they're actually very technical pieces of equipment, very dangerous pieces of equipment. And encourage you to, if you haven't had some training, to get some. If it's been a long time since you've had training, like years and decades, it's perfectly all right and a good idea to get a refresher. And you might actually learn about some new techniques that the professionals are encouraging people to use because they're safer and more efficient. We at UW-Madison Extension offer some chainsaw training opportunities, especially for women, but we also work with some private contractors that offer training too, and we can connect you to those. So I encourage you to visit our website, woodlandinfo.org, and you can see where the trainings are taking place now, where they have been in the past, and you can contact our extension website if you have questions about when trainings will be taking place if you're not finding information you're looking for. So don't be afraid to contact those folks. The professional is there for you. Your tax dollars are paying for them. Take advantage of it. Okay, that's all I have. We're finishing a little early. I'm happy to answer any questions. If you have no questions and I've answered all your questions and done a first-rate job of getting you all the information you need, fantastic. Otherwise, Keith, any questions I should be addressing or?
So we have a lot of questions in the chat for you.
Okay.
So,
Might
so
just
we
stop sharing. Hold on a second.
so one of the questions was specifically about an influx of pale Indian planting, invading prairie, and then moving into the woods. Do you have any suggestions or resources for someone who could talk about how they can manage that a little bit more?
That's a really good question. I say that's a really good question because I don't have a good answer. I'm not familiar with that particular species, and if one of my colleagues has a good answer, I open the floor to you, Keith. By chance, have you worked on that particular species before?
Yeah, from what I can recall, this can be kind of a common prairie plant that we see in prairie plantings. I think the question is right. It can, in some instances, be a little bit aggressive. I would kind of think about what else is kind of around. So first, do we have other invasive species that might be more of a management problem, such as buckthorn, for an example? Start with that. But if you've kind of been doing some things of cutting, removing seed heads, we might be thinking about an herbicide application as well, maybe to kind of limit the populations of that plant in particular. So this is one that we particularly see more in prairie settings.
And
And
just to,
then,
oh,
oh, go ahead, Johanna.
well, and I was just going to add that this question in particular might be a good one to reach out to your local NRCS office.
Hmm.
They're pretty good at talking about helping manage between, prairies and woodlands. So I did put a link in the chat for where you can find your local office. So I'd maybe suggest you reach out to them if you have more specific questions about it.
Then we also had a question about prescribed fire. So, Bill, if you want, I could take a stab at this one.
Go for it.
All right. So the question is basically on what is the value of prescribed fire for managing woodlands, controlling invasives, and I see that we have some questions around fall, spring, anytime that we can use prescribed fire. So, in short, prescribed fire can be a really effective, really important management tool, both for the management of invasive species, but then also prescribed fire can help us with tree regeneration in certain instances. So for certain tree species, it can clear the litter. It can create kind of a bare soil condition, which really helps some species of trees regenerate. So we're talking about some of our birches, lots of our oaks, lots of our pines. In Wisconsin, we do see a lot of forests that are fire adapted. So they kind of evolved to have frequent fire. This is primarily our oaks, our pine forests, and then sometimes our hickories as well. So the distinction here is it is true, there are some vulnerable trees or trees that are a little bit more vulnerable to the use of fire. So typically we see a lot of fire being used in central, southern Wisconsin, and typically fall and spring are when we see a lot of like woodland burn applications. There are some times in which managers will use more growing season burns, so kind of like in late spring, summer, but that's a little bit rare in Wisconsin. But know that that is an important management tool. It's just kind of dependent on what trees you have, what trees are growing there, and kind of what your management goals.
And then we did have another question about the talk about the value of wolves might have to trees.
Uh, I think that wolves play a big part of helping to control um, deer populations. It can be kind of spotty because where the pack is located, if it's not around near your property, they're not going to have much effect on you. And in fact, they might have the opposite effect. They might push deer away from where the packs are towards your property. So if I'm actually reading your question right or answering your question correctly, I think they can have an impact, but it's not something that you can rely on as a way to help to control the deer. And fences are, I hate to say the fences are the best way to keep deer out and help the seedlings grow the best they can. Um, and they can be temporary. And once your trees are mature and they get above your head and above 6 feet, they usually can do pretty well without any further protection.
Okay, thanks, Bill. And then we had another question. If I plant a red or white oak plug in a tree tube in my woods, how much sunshine does it need? In other words, how clear do I have to have the area around it for its growth?
Yeah, that's a good question. Oak can do okay in some shade or a mixed shade where, if it's completely underneath a canopy it gets very little shade, it won't do as well. It'll really struggle. It can grow, obviously, it can grow well in full sunlight, but mixed shade is okay. Those gaps that I showed in the second scenario will do okay for oak. Oak will do pretty good in that. Obviously, the big openings will do really well, but it needs some sunlight. So when we do prescriptions, as foresters, when we do prescriptions for reproducing oak, it's always kind of a mixed sunlight situation. Because if you have too much sunlight, then they can get drowned out by those trees that grow really fast in full sunlight. And then if it's not enough sunlight, they grow slower than those that can grow well in sunlight, like the maples. And so something that's mixed, a good gap size that, like I showed in that second scenario, like I said, something half an acre in size is you put oak in there, they'll probably do pretty good. And then cleared around them, it's good too when you're planting to clear away around the plant. And um, the picture I showed of that landowner with the tree tubes, there is what his procedure was. He put the plug in the ground, uh, packed it into the soil, put the tree tube over it, put that in, and then he would spray an herbicide on around the outside of that tube. And that's to keep the competition down directly around where that plug is in the ground. And it only lasts for maybe 2 or 3 years before the plants start to come in again and really take over. But that's enough for that plug to get big enough that it'll be above most of the grasses and the low kind of plants that would shade it from getting full sunlight.
Great. And so then we also had a question about ants. Do ants kill pine trees, or are there a lot of ants because the trees are ailing?
Oh, ants are a tough one. They tend to like sunlight and sandy soil where we tend to plant pine. As a general or as a killer of pine trees, I think it's more of a kind of very specific individual basis where they put their homes are, the ant hills or the ant mounds or the caverns, where they put those in will probably kill the species. But I don't think they go around killing the trees. They sometimes will collect sap from sapsuckers and which is an interesting to see. We've got a sandy soil where I live, and there's ants going up and down the tree, and they're feeding off the sapsuckers, the insects that are sucking the sap out of the branches. And I know our trees do okay. They're not suffering from it, but they're up and down in there, and that often will attract birds that'll just feed on the ants. So I haven't seen any problems with ants being a big issue with tree death, tree mortality. And so you can keep an eye on it, but it might affect one or two trees, but it's not a big deal. And if you have a ton of ants and you're worried about it, you can always do something about the ants in many different forms. And like I said, they will attract birds that once the birds find that there's a lot of ants in a tree, they'll be all over it and feeding like crazy.
Great. So we had another question um, about the invasion of worms and how that impacts the growth at the root level. Keith did put a resource in there, but I didn't know if there was anything else, Bill, you wanted to add on that.
Only that the worms can be a tough one. Once they're in there, they'll slowly spread around your property. Slowly is the key word. So don't dump if you go fishing and have worms, don't dump in your woods. Dispose of them properly, because they change the forest floor constituents and make it very, and you'll see some properties that just have grass growing or sedges and almost nothing else because the worms consume all the leaf litter, and many of the tree species that we have need to grow, and the seeds need to germinate in that leaf litter and that organic layer in the soil, and worms will kind of get rid of all of that. They consume all of that, and that's where the problem can be when it comes to worms. So if you've got them, it could be a problem well into the future. I don't know. I know if you want to get worms, you pour milk into the ground and worms will come out like crazy, but that's not a very practical solution. There's probably are some out there that are a bit more practical than that.
Yeah. Okay, so just a couple more questions. Um, I'm finding some 1 to 2 foot swamp white oaks sprouting in my woods that the deer haven't found yet. Should I leave them there or should I try to protect them?
Oh, I protect them. And you you might get lucky and the deer will never find them. But if it were me, I do this all the time. And when I'm walking my property and I find a little oak seedling, I'll drop a little cage around it until it gets bigger, and then I'll put a bigger cage on it. It's because I don't have enough oak and I want more oak. And so definitely it doesn't take much. Some cheap fencing is enough just to get it so that it's above, a 5 foot small plastic wire mesh fence is enough to just keep it away, and drop a stake into the ground next to it and tie it to it. And when that tree gets bigger, you just take it down. It'll be fun to watch to see how that changes over time.
Okay,
I'd
and then we
also
just
mention I'd also mention that oaks can be really, really prized for deer. They have a tendency to really like to go after those first.
and then we had another question that just came in. What is a good plant to grow for erosion control along our stream bank?
The best ones are the ones with deep roots. That's a good starting point. And some of our native grasses are good for that. It really depends on what you're trying to accomplish along the stream bank. And if you want a mixture of different kinds of species, um, this is a good place to talk with the folks, the district conservationists, and the DNR foresters too. They can offer some suggestions on what's a good mix to put in. I would say that's my advice. Deep roots are always the best, and if it's a steeper, you need something with a stouter kind of shrub probably to hold that bank in place. Keith, you got any ideas?
No, I think that that's a really good recommendation. Planting with diversity in mind, even in these instances, I think is a really good idea. So linking up with those NRCS partners is good. Native grasses are always really good. Riverbank rise is a good one as well. But again, planting with diversity in mind.
Okay, so we just have one last question, and it's Bill wondering how you're planning to enjoy the first few days of your retirement.
Oh, well, I'm gonna enjoy not having to fit to a schedule. I'm going to be relaxing, I think, and thinking about where my future will take me. And I appreciate the question. Um, I appreciate the time that folks that attended and listened to me blab on for an hour now. And thanks to my colleagues for supporting me on this presentation and in general. And thanks everyone for attending. I think then if that was my cue, thanks. I'll be sending out an email with the links from this recording, along with some of the stuff we talked about during the class, links to those as well, and this afternoon. So you should be seeing that soon. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Keith and Johanna, for your help. Take care.